Imagine this. You take the brain of a world-class vision model, like DINO or SIGLIP, and plug it straight into a diffusion transformer. That's the wild idea behind Representation Autoencoders, or RAEs. Instead of squishing images into tiny, blurry latents like old-school VAEs, RAE keeps the rich, high-dimensional features from these pre-trained encoders and teaches a lightweight decoder to reconstruct the image. Then, the diffusion model learns to operate directly in this smarter space. The result? Cleaner images, faster training, and state-of-the-art FID scores. 151 at 256 by 256 without any tricks. In short, the team showed that you don't need to shrink your data to make it beautiful. You just need to teach your model to think in meaning instead of pixels.
All right, let's dive into this paper. The core idea is actually quite simple and elegant. For a while now, the go-to method for creating high-quality images, like with Stable Diffusion, has been latent diffusions. Instead of working with giant, messy pixel data, you first use an autoencoder to compress the image into a smaller, cleaner, latent space. Then, you run the diffusion process there. It's faster and more efficient. The authors point out a huge, overlooked problem. While the diffusion models themselves, especially diffusion transformers, or DITs as we'll call them, have gotten incredibly powerful, the autoencoder part has been stuck in the past. Most models are still using the same old VAE from the original latent diffusion paper. The authors argue this is a major bottleneck. This old VAE has an outdated architecture, a small, latent space that can't hold much information, and its representations aren't very meaningful because it was only trained to reconstruct images. So what's their big idea? They propose swapping out this old component. Instead of a VAE, they build what they call a Representation Autoencoder, or RAE. From now on, we'll call it the RAE. They take a powerful, pre-trained encoder, like DINO or MAE, which are great at understanding the content of an image, and pair it with a new, lightweight decoder. This gives them a latent space that's not just compressed, but also semantically rich. It actually understands what's in the image. Now, this new latent space is much bigger and more complex. The main technical challenge they solve is figuring out how to make the diffusion transformer work effectively in this high-dimensional space. As you can see in Figure 1, their approach pays off big time. This chart plots model performance over the years, with lower being better. All the old VAE-based models are the gray dots. Their new RAE-based models are the blue dots, sitting way down at the bottom, setting a new state-of-the-art. It's a classic case of identifying the weakest link in a pipeline and upgrading it with modern tech. So to really understand why this works so well, the authors dig into the motivation behind their idea. They start by contrasting two worlds that have been evolving separately. On one hand, you have generative modeling, which has been stuck using old VAEs. These VAEs are only good at one thing: reconstructing pixels. They capture local details, but miss the bigger picture, the semantic meanings. On the other hand, the world of visual representation learning has exploded with models like DINO, MAE, and CLIP. These models are fantastic at understanding what's times an image. They learn rich, structured features that are useful for all sorts of tasks. The authors' key insight is that latent diffusion has been completely ignoring this progress. They then challenge a common belief in the field. Many researchers thought that encoders trained for semantics, like DINO, would be bad for generation because they don't focus on perfect pixel-for-pixel reconstruction. It was also believed that diffusion models would struggle in the high-dimensional latent spaces these encoders produce. The authors basically say, we think those assumptions are wrong. They show that you repurpose these powerful representation encoders for generation, and they actually work better than the old VAEs. But it's not a simple plug-and-play solution. They identify three key challenges. First, the standard DIT architecture isn't built for these high-dimensional latents. Second, the way noise is scheduled and added needs to be rethought. And third, the new decoder needs to be robust enough to handle the outputs from the diffusion process. To solve this, they introduce a new DIT variant with a special lightweight, wide head, which they call DIT-DH. This new architecture is designed specifically to thrive in these richer, more complex, latent spaces. Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of what this new architecture actually looks like. Figure 2 here gives a fantastic visual. It's a tale of two architectures. On the left, you have the old way, a DIT with a VAE. The VAE's encoder and decoder are these big, clunky UNet blocks. Look at the numbers. The decoder alone costs 310 gigaflops. It's a computational beast. Now look at the right side, their new approach with the RAE. The whole thing is built with modern vision transformers. The encoder is super lightweight at just 22 gigaflops, and the decoder is also much leaner at 106 gigaflops. So not only is their RAE system creating better, more meaningful latent spaces, it's also way more efficient. It's a win-win. Next, the authors situate their work among other recent papers. They acknowledge that others have tried to improve the VAE by aligning it with better representations. But these methods often add complexity and still rely on heavy compression. Their approach is more direct. Just use the strong encoder as is without compression and build a good decoder for it. Finally, they start detailing how they build their RAE. They take a powerful, frozen, pre-trained encoder like DINO-V2. The common wisdom was that these encoders, being trained for high-level semantics, would be terrible at reconstructing fine details. The authors prove this wrong. They show that if you pair one of these frozen encoders with a properly trained, lightweight, VIT-based decoder, you can get reconstructions that are just as good, if not better, than the old, heavyweight SDVAE. This is a huge deal, because it means you get high-fidelity reconstruction and a semantically rich latent space at the same time, which was previously thought to be a trade-off. Alright, so they've made a big claim that their RAE is better. Let's see how they back it up with data. This page is all about the numbers, and Table 1 is the star of the show. It's broken into 4 parts, each telling a piece of a very compelling story. First, in Table 1A, they test different pre-trained encoders for their RAE, DINO, SIGLIP, and MAE. The takeaway? All of them are significantly better at reconstructing images than the old SDVAE, as measured by the RFID score. Lower is better here, and they're all crushing it. Next, Table 1B looks at the decoder. They show that as you make the VIT-based decoder bigger, the reconstruction quality gets even better. But here's the kicker. Even their largest, most powerful decoder is still almost 3 times more computationally efficient than the single, clunky decoder in the SDVAE, so you get better quality for less compute. Table 1C is a quick sanity check. They swap out different sizes of the DINO encoder and find that the reconstruction quality stays pretty stable. This is good news, because it means the approach is robust. But Table 1D is where the magic really happens. They test the asterisk semantic quality of the latent space. They do this by seeing how well you can classify an image just by looking at its latent representation. The RAEs, especially DINO, get over 84% accuracy. The old SDVAE? A miserable 8%. This is the proof in the pudding. The RAE creates a latent space that not only reconstructs the image well, but also deeply understands its content. So they've proven their RAE is great. But now they face the next big question. Can a diffusion model actually learn to generate things in this new, powerful latent space? They set up their experiment, choosing DINO-V2 as their default encoder, and get ready to tame the diffusion transformer. Okay, so they've built this fantastic new autoencoder, but when they plug it into a standard diffusion model, things don't go so well. This is where the plot thickens. As Table 2 shows, when they try to train a standard DIT on their new RAE latents, it completely fails. The FID scores are terrible, way worse than the old VAE-based methods. This is a classic research moment. A great idea meets an unexpected, harsh reality. So they put on their detective hats and try to figure out why. They hypothesize 3 potential culprits. The DIT's design is wrong, the noise schedule is wrong, or the decoder is too sensitive. To test the first idea, they run a really clever experiment shown in Figure 3. Instead of the whole dataset, they try to make the DIT overfit to just a single image. The left plot is the key. They vary the width of the transformer, which is its internal processing dimension. They discover a hard rule. If the transformer's width is smaller than the dimension of the latent tokens from the RAE, it can't even learn to copy one image. The reconstructions are garbage, but the instant the width is equal to or greater than the token dimension, it works perfectly. The right plot confirms this. They try to cheat the system by keeping the width too small but making the model deeper. It doesn't work. You can't compensate for a narrow bottleneck by adding more layers. The conclusion is crystal clear. The DIT's width must be scaled to match the dimensionality of the RAE's latent space. The standard DIT architecture, designed for tiny 4-dimensional VAE latents, was simply not wide enough for this new, richer 768-dimensional space. This single insight is the key to unlocking the whole problem. Now, they don't just stop at this observation. They actually provide a solid theoretical reason for why times this width requirement exists. They're not just saying, hey, it looks like the model's width needs to be bigger. They're proving it. They start by challenging a common idea that image data lives on some low-dimensional manifold. They argue that the diffusion process itself, by adding noise, effectively spreads the data out to fill the entire high-dimensional space. This means your model needs enough capacity to handle that full dimensionality. Then comes the heavy hitting. Theorem 1. You don't need to be a math whiz to get the gist. They basically prove, with equations, that if a DIT's internal width is smaller than the dimension of the latent tokens it's trying to process, there's a hard limit on how well it can perform. The loss can never go to zero. It's like trying to pour a gallon of water through a tiny funnel. You're guaranteed to lose something. The math shows that the model is forced to discard information, and that discarded information shows up as unavoidable error. To back this up, check out Table 3. It's a simple but powerful grid. They mix and match DITs of different widths with RAEs that produce tokens of different dimensions. The results are exactly what the theorem predicts. Whenever the DIT's width is smaller than the token dimension, you get a red X, failure. Whenever the width is large enough, you get a green checkmark, success. So they've diagnosed the problem, proven it with theory, and confirmed it with experiments. The first major hurdle is cleared. The takeaway is simple and actionable. To make DITs work with RAEs, you have to make them wide enough. Alright, so they've solved the biggest architectural problem. But they're not done yet. They fine-tune their recipe by fixing two more subtle issues. First is the noise schedule. Think of this as the recipe for how you gradually add noise to an image during training. The old recipes were designed for low-dimensional VAE latents. The authors realized that for their new, high-dimensional RAE space, this recipe is all wrong. As you can see in Table 4, when they switch to a new, dimension-aware noise schedule, the FID score drops from a mediocre 23 down to a very respectable 4.81. It's a huge, easy win. Second, they address a brittleness problem with their decoder. The RAE decoder was trained to reconstruct images from perfect, clean, latent codes, but the diffusion model, being imperfect, will generate latents that are a little bit noisy. This mismatch hurts the final image quality. Their solution is clever. They retrain the decoder, but this time they add a tiny bit of noise to the latent codes during training. This noise-augmented decoding makes the decoder more robust. Table 5 shows the result. Generative quality gets even better, dropping the FID to 4.28. There's a small trade-off. Perfect reconstruction gets a tiny bit worse, but it's well worth it for better generations. Finally, they put all three fixes together: the wide DIT, the new noise schedule, and the robust decoder. Figure 4 shows the payoff. Their model, the green line, absolutely smokes the competition. It converges dramatically faster. The paper notes it's up to 47 times faster than a standard VAE-based DIT to reach the same quality. This is the complete package. A model that's not only better, but also far more efficient to train. So, they have a working recipe, but making the whole model wider is a bit of a brute force solution. It gets very expensive, very fast. Here's where they introduce a much more elegant fix: the wide diffusion head, which they call the DIT-DH head. The idea, shown in Figure 5, is really smart. Instead of widening the whole DIT, they keep the main body of the transformer at a standard, efficient size. Then, they just tack on a small, specialized module at the very end. This head is very shallow, only a couple of layers deep, but it's very wide. It does the heavy lifting of handling the high-dimensional RAE latents right at the final step. This gives them the best of both worlds: the necessary width without the massive computational overhead. And the results in Figure 6 are just fantastic. Plot A shows that this new DIT-DH architecture is way more efficient, achieving better results for far less compute than the standard wide DIT. Plot C, the bubble chart, tells the whole story. Their models are the blue bubbles at the very bottom, meaning they get the best FID scores, and they do it without being the biggest, most expensive models on the block. Finally, Table 6 drives the point home. The DIT-DH head doesn't just make the model more efficient, it actually makes it times better. Across RAEs of different sizes, the DIT-DH backquote consistently outperforms the standard DIT, and the performance gap gets even bigger as the latent space gets more complex. This simple architectural tweak is the final key, turning their great idea into a state-of-the-art, highly scalable system. And here we are, the grand finale. This is where all that hard work, the clever architectural tweaks, and the theoretical insights pay off in the form of state-of-the-art results. Let's start with the main event, Table 8. Think of this as the Olympics of image generation on the 256 by 256 ImageNet benchmark. The authors line up their model against everyone: older autoregressive models, pixel-based diffusion models, and all the recent latent diffusion models that use the old VAE. Looking down the FID column, you can see the story of progress. The numbers get lower and lower. The best VAE-based models are already very good, getting FIDs in the 1s and 2s. Then you get to the bottom row, their model. Without any guidance, it scores a 1.51 FID, which is a new world record. But with guidance, it achieves a stunning 1.13 FID. They didn't just inch past the previous best, they set a new, much higher bar for performance. But the question is, can it scale? Generating good 256 by 256 images is one thing, but 512 by 512 is much harder. That's where Table 7 comes in. Here they go head-to-head with the best high-resolution models out there. And once again, they come out on top. They achieve the exact same incredible FID of 1.13 at 512 by 512. This is huge. It proves their approach isn't a fluke. The combination of a rich RAE latent space and the efficient DIT-DH head is a robust, scalable foundation for top-tier image generations. This is the definitive proof that their core idea, upgrading the autoencoder, was the right move. After dropping the mic with those numbers, the authors basically say, don't just take our word for it, look at the pictures. And Figure 7 really delivers. This is the qualitative proof. The images are stunning. You've got cockatoos with incredibly fine feather details, sea turtles in beautifully lit underwater scenes, lighthouses at sunset, and hamburgers that look good enough to eat. The quality, detail, and diversity here are top-notch and fully back up their record-breaking FID scores. The text then briefly recaps their performance, reminding us of the 1.51 FID without guidance and the 1.13 FID with guidance, achieved at both 256 by 256 and 512 by 512 resolutions. Then they include a very important remark on FID evaluation. This is a sign of great research practice. They noticed that different papers were calculating the FID score in slightly different ways, which can affect the numbers. To make sure it was a truly fair comparison, they went back and reran the evaluations for several competing methods using a single, consistent protocol. This adds a lot of credibility to their claims. They're not just showing their numbers are better, they're showing they're better on a level playing field. Finally, they transition into the discussion, starting to think about the future. They ask the big question: how can we push this RAE approach to even higher resolutions efficiently? This signals the end of the main results and the beginning of reflection and future work. This final section is all about tying up loose ends and really driving home the core message of why times this all works. The authors perform a series of ablation studies to prove exactly what makes their method tick. First, they ask if their DIT-DH architecture is useful without the RAE. The answer, shown in Table 10, is a resounding no. When they try to use their new architecture on the old, low-dimensional VAE latents, it actually performs worse. This is a crucial finding. It proves their DIT-DH head isn't just a generic upgrade, it's a specialized tool perfectly tailored to solve the unique challenges of the high-dimensional RAE space. The two components work in synergy. Next, they ask the opposite question: is the success just about high dimensionality, or does the asterisk semantic structure of the RAE's latents matter? To test this, they train their model on raw pixels, which are high-dimensional but unstructured. As Table 11 shows, the results are terrible. This proves that the secret sauce isn't just having a big latent space, it's having a big latent space that is rich with meaning, which is exactly what the pre-trained encoders like DINO provide. Finally, the paper concludes by beautifully summarizing its journey. They started by challenging the old assumption that powerful representation encoders were unsuitable for generation. They introduced the RAE, diagnosed the new problems it created for diffusion transformers, and systematically solved them with 3 key innovations, culminating in the scalable DIT/DH architecture. The result is a new state-of-the-art in image generation and a powerful new recipe for the future. They make a bold final claim. RAE should be the new default for training diffusion transformers. Based on the evidence, it's hard to disagree. Thanks for joining us today. Happy exploring together.